Mitiga, Bujarina Junya, Naya Christina. Hello, good to see you. My name is Christina, and that's in Darug Dalam, the language of the Darug people, the land I'm on today. Please put your microphone on mute if you're not already on mute. We can hear somebody having a conversation. Thank you. I acknowledge the Darug people as the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which I work and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I recognise their enduring connections to the land and waters of this wonderful country that I'm privileged to live and work on and raise my family on. I deeply thank the Darug community for sharing their language with me. It'd be great to know where you're all dialing in from as well today. So please share where you're from in the chat or in your display name so we can get to know each other a bit better. To those who've attended a SIMNA event before, welcome back, and a special welcome to those who are new to SIMNA. You may know that SIMNA is a fantastic network of people who work in or are interested in or even just curious about social impact measurement. You don't have to be an expert to be a member of SIMNA. SIMNA exists to connect ideas, people and resources to ensure positive social and environmental impact are at the core of organisations and decision making. Everyone is welcome to join SIMNA. It's affordable, and if you're a member, you can get access to events like this for free. SIMNA has organising committees across Australia, and this is a SIMNA Western Sydney event. And we started SIMNA Western Sydney in 2019 for a few reasons. It's a massive and growing residential and employment hub, aka it's the place to be. It's incredibly diverse and interesting, aka it's the place to be. And it has so many great stories that need to be heard, but that can get drowned out. This session today is relevant to the many organisations and people in Western Sydney that are active in social impact measurement, mental health, digital services, and who work with young people, though obviously its appeal is wider than the Western Sydney geography, and the people attending this webinar are coming from all across Australia and are evidence of that. What we're going to hear about today is an example of work that a Western Sydney social impact measurement practitioner, Natalie, Jurisic, is doing. So all of us on the SIMNA Western Sydney Committee, if you could raise your hands, me, Nat, Amy, Sophie and Joe, who aren't on the call today, are connected to Western Sydney through where we grew up, where we live, where we work, or a combination of these. Social impact measurement expertise and interest in social impact measurement is alive and well in Western Sydney, let me assure you, and we are committed to giving it a platform and supporting its development here because we feel passionately about the region. So before we kick off, I'm going to hand over to Laura now for some housekeeping that will help keep the session running smoothly today, and then we'll kick off. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Christina, and welcome again, everyone. It's so lovely to see so many people joining today. I'd also like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people as the traditional custodians of the land where I live and work, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So yeah, I know we're all very used to being on Zoom these days, but just a couple of reminders to please keep your microphones muted, and we are on camera, so if you don't want to be seen by everybody, then please feel free to turn your cameras off. And as you would have seen when we joined, today's session is being recorded, just so you're all aware of that. And if you have any questions for our speakers as we're going through the session, please pop them into chat and we'll have lots of time to answer those at the end. Back to you, Christina.
Thank you, Laura. So in today's webinar, we're going to hear about ReachOut's journey to introducing an outcomes measurement framework into a digital service environment. Now, ReachOut have been around for the past 20 years, offering digital mental health support to young people, and our speakers are going to tell you more about ReachOut and what they do in a moment. Both Karen and Nat, who are going to be presenting today, are part of ReachOut's social impact team, which was established about 18 months ago. Karen Wilcox is the Director of Research and Impact at ReachOut and a member of ReachOut's leadership team. She's worked in human services in frontline, management and executive roles and in sector practice development. She has been working in social impact since 2013 and has been a member of SIMNA since its inception. She's also near completion of a PhD, which is really exciting, in outcomes measurement in not-for-profit organisations at UNSW. Natalie Jurisic is Senior Manager of Social Impact at ReachOut. She has more than 20 years experience working in consultancies and also in not-for-profits across social and market research, evaluation and outcomes measurement. She's currently co-chair of the SIMNA Western Sydney Committee with me, and she's one of its founding members. So welcome to you both, and thanks for joining us on this webinar. I'll hand over to you to take us through the reach out journey.
Thanks so much, Christina, for such a beautiful start to the webinar, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Karen and I are both coming to you from Gadigal land, and we'd like to pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land, and also welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders participants in the webinar today. We are really excited today to share with you where ReachOut are at in terms of our social impact work so far, following what's been quite a dedicated and focused shift towards social impact measurement here at ReachOut. And that's been something that's been moving for the last 18 months or so. And I guess today's really a discussion about social value and how we view that at ReachOut. And in thinking and preparing for today's webinar, what we really want to come out of today is to leave you with some ideas or practical tips for how you might approach social impact measurement in your own organisations, particularly if you're in the digital service delivery space. But also we'd love to see today spark some conversations around social impact measurement in this group, and we also welcome the opportunity for people to connect with us after the webinar, particularly from digital service providers who are in a similar space to ours. We'd love to hear from you. So in terms of what we'll be taking you through today, firstly, I'll just tell you a little bit more about ReachOut, and Karen will take you through why we chose to develop a social impact framework, and we'll both talk about components of our model that we believe make it quite unique. And also how we developed it, which was, quite a chunky process, but a really important one. Karen will also talk about our social impact cycle, and then we'll finish up by talking about 10 lessons so far that, we've learned and we've observed over the last 18 months. So ReachOut have been around, as Christina said, for the last 20 years or so, and, we are very much a digital service delivery trailblazer. We are Australia's leading online mental health service that provides non-clinical support to young people facing mental health challenges. And our purpose at ReachOut is to be the trusted and safe digital space that empowers young people to feel better. So that's what drives us. In terms of how we provide that support, we do it by providing support to 3 types of key user groups. Obviously, young people, they're core, but also those who support young people, such as parents and carers and educators in schools. And in terms of categorising our support, we'd broadly say there's sort of 3 types of support we offer. We offer a range of psychosocial content across our website and also our social media channels, so Instagram, Facebook and TikTok, but also on YouTube. And that's for all user groups, so young people, parents, carers and educators in schools. As well, we also have an online community for young people to share their feelings and what they're going through with others like themselves, which it's a moderated space. And we also have a forum for parents and carers also that's moderated, where parents can share their challenges. And lastly, we have one-to-one support for young people in the form of a peer chat service, which we're really thrilled to launch last year. And we have a one-to-one coaching service for parents and carers as well. And I think the thing to note across what we do and critical to remember today is that we are always digital. And so that's wonderful, but it represents some challenges from a social impact measurement perspective as well. Our service is always free. And by and large, most of the service support that we offer is anonymous in nature. So we really had to keep that in mind as we were formulating this model. So I'll just hand over to Karen now to talk about why we've chosen to develop a framework.
Thanks, Nat. So ReachOut had quite a few good reasons to develop a bespoke social impact framework, but for us there were 3 critical things. The first was to actually look at how we could better understand the organisation-wide difference that we were making. So although ReachOut, like most organisations in the social sector, had been conducting evaluations and collecting data. We had a few different ways of collecting output and what we might call client satisfaction data. Those were generated usually on a program or service level, and we wanted to try to develop something that could speak to the value of the organisation as a whole, so that we could really demonstrate in a valid way that ReachOut was making a difference as a service. And I think although most organisations are often driven into this space by the funding requirements and their acquittal reporting requirements around their contracts and commissions, for us, this was a real internal push, which I think is quite unique. The second was that it would help us to develop and enhance our services. And this speaks to that, again, I think a lot of you would be familiar with the push towards data-driven decision-making. So by bringing together impact data, we would be better equipped to actually look at how effective our services were, where we might need to tweak them, whether we might need to add new things into the mix in order to achieve our organisation level outcomes. And the third one is the accountability piece. So as you'd be aware, most of us working in the social sector, in the non-profit sector, are required to be accountable to our funders and our donors and our supporters. But for ReachOut and for a number of other organisations, we also wanted to be able to be accountable to our young people and their parents and families and communities. So have some information about the change that we were making that we could feed back or feed in that downward accountability way. But there's also the sideways accountability piece, which is about giving our team members an opportunity to really see how the organisation makes a difference to the people they work with. It's one of the key reasons people come to work at ReachOut. Everybody here is driven by our purpose. So this gives us something to help support the team to feel good about the work they do. So thanks, Nat. So obviously, social impact work in this sector is often challenging and often involves needing to find a bit of a sweet spot. And that's the point where you know that you're measuring enough to know what's really going on and can understand the value of the work you do, but at the same time, bringing in robustness and accuracy in that measurement within a context that we're all operating in, where our resources are limited and we don't have a lot of money under most funding programs for evaluation work. So we had to get a sweet spot and balance all of those things out. And for this reason, we had to juggle 3 different challenges, I guess, in finding that sweet spot. We're providing services to a vulnerable subpopulation, but in a particular way, we sit in the mental health service system as a digital early intervention and prevention service. So that is quite unique in this space. And the first of those challenges that comes out of that is that we're essentially anonymous and purely digital. And anonymity is one of the reasons people come to ReachOut. Young people like to know that they can find out about mental health support without having to reveal who they are, without having to go through their parents and teachers often. So we had to be mindful and respectful of this, but it gave us a real challenge. We can't follow up people who use our services. We can't test our client outcomes in a pre and post way that face-to-face or even digital clinical services can do, where they have an intake and they have registration. So that was a really big challenge. The second one was that we have lots of output data as a digital service. Digital organisations in any space have a lot of data that they collect. So we decided that our output data was valuable in its own right. And the reason that I pull that out is that usually in developing outcomes frameworks in organisations, people follow a kind of program logic or results chain in their thinking. But for us, our outputs weren't just one of the parts of the chain towards outcomes. We saw that in their own right, separate to the outcomes we achieved, they told us a story about the value of the organisation. And Natalie will go into that in a bit more detail as well. And the third thing that we wanted to take into account in developing our model is that we have a deep commitment to adhering to the principles of social value. And I think we can put that in the chat, but that comes from the Social Value International work in this social impact measurement space, and everyone who's a member of SIMNA will have access to those resources. But they're incredibly valuable. In particular, we wanted to really deeply think about what it would mean to understand about what really changes for the young people and their supporters. And we deeply interrogated that and revised our theory of change around that. We wanted to also capture what matters to young people and create our framework around that measure what matters part of the social value principles. And I guess the most important one for me, I've been working in this space for a while, is that I wanted to be really careful that we didn't overclaim. So it's quite tempting for organisations in developing their impact or outcomes work to make really, I guess, sweeping claims about what they think the service is going to achieve, and that's often directed by funding bodies as well. It's something that I think everyone has to grapple with. But we're working often in complex systems on wicked problems that we can't possibly solve and capture change in that way. And that was a really critical part of developing, what we wanted to be a robust framework. We were both really upfront with our teams and supporters on this. This next slide, thanks. And this was kind of our mantra. It's from Miss Congeniality, one of my favourite phrases. We didn't want to try to be claiming that we were going to achieve world peace. So what could we actually be confident we could claim? So this led us to develop what are the key building blocks of our social impact framework. The first of those is reach, and they're the output metrics that I spoke about before. In the digital sector, this is a really important data set, and so we needed to include that. Digital organisations of any type talk about visitation, they talk about unique visitors, they look at a whole bunch of things that are relevant to how successful the digital organisation is. And so we borrowed from the digital space more generally, whether it's e-commerce or other resources, to build this into our framework. But we also wanted to make sure that we're having the right reach. So we started to collect data that unpacks people who have a high need for our support, who are at risk of or more vulnerable to having poor mental health, and people who have less access to other services, given that we sit in a space in the service system where we can provide access across Australia where people otherwise might not be able to access clinical or other services. The second of our planets or building blocks is engagement. Again, this is something that comes from the digital space. So digital platforms have been working with engagement for a long time. They can tell an organisation that their web-based services are actually meeting the mark, regardless of the kind of digital platform. And that covers a whole lot of things which we built into our framework, but they might be things like completion of tasks on site, conversion, scroll through and page depth and those kinds of engagement metrics. But we also, given that we are actually working in the social media space, not just as a marketing strategy, but as part of our content articulation, we have a number of engagement metrics from the social media world as well, which we've included in our framework. And the third part of our social impact framework is what you're all used to thinking about, which is the outcomes. And that's outcomes are just what change has happened as a result of a service user engaging with us. It's the results of our service, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with outcomes thinking, but that's basically what it is, what's actually changed because someone has come to reach out. And that's going to talk in a bit more detail about our outcomes and how we landed on the domains that we have landed on.
Thanks, Karen. So working out here are our outcomes, our 6 outcome domains, but working out what they look like actually involved quite a lot of work. This was a really chunky component of all the thinking time. Really important to mention that there had been a lot of work done on this stuff historically, and we certainly weren't starting from a blank slate. So a lot of data, a lot of thinking around program logics and so on. So that was enormously excellent coming into the organisation. But we also were conscious of the need to involve others. So that sort of became part of the process too. And we ended up landing on 6. We call them outcome domains internally. That can be outcome themes, areas. But we ended up coming up with 6 because we certainly didn't want to have too many, because I think when you do have too many outcome domains, that can be difficult to remember, and you want them to be memorable internally, also externally. So 6 felt like a good number. We also wanted to ensure that they worked across our different user groups and that they could encompass different types of user experiences. And thirdly, we wanted to make sure that they were differentiated enough from each other. So that would really help us when we're developing measures, that they're not kind of sitting on top of each other. They need to be pulled apart a little bit. So I'll take you through them. The first outcome domain is mental health literacy, and anyone who's had any contact with ReachOut support knows that this is a real significant component of what we do. Got lots of psychoeducation materials for all our user groups on our website and on our socials. And so this is about increasing knowledge and understanding of mental health. A second outcome domain was connection, so feeling more connected to others. And that's something, for instance, we see regularly on our online community forum for young people, where young people are sharing what they're struggling with and connecting with other like-minded young people or young people who've been through a similar experience. So certainly spoke to what we do and will continue to be doing into the future. Our third domain was around better understanding of self. And this is an interesting one because it's not only in terms of what you as a young person, enhancing understanding of what's going on for you, but it's also for parents and carers that are supporting young people, understanding what the young person in their life is going through. And so this is something, for example, we see play out with our parent carer coaching program. This is kind of part of that program, is about understanding, what things are like for their young person. Our fourth domain was around sense of agency, and this is really around increasing confidence and helping users feel more in control to manage mental health challenges they might experience, because we also know that mental health isn't this sort of neat line. It goes up and down. And so if you look at some of our content, it really speaks to this outcome domain quite strongly. Our fifth outcome domain is about relief from negative feelings. And we know and we hear from young people that the range of supports that we offer really sort of fit with this domain. For instance, our peer chat service has an emoji rating system. So our peer chat service for young people, where you rate how you're feeling before your peer chat session and then after. So, we've got a built-in mechanism to measure how we're traveling for that service on this outcome domain. And then lastly, we have an outcome domain around validation, because hearing from young people, looking at the sort of lots of data that we looked at as part of this, really ReachOut helps young people in particular feel okay about who they are and what they're experiencing. And we do see that play out across a range of our services as well. So that's our model. And it looks pretty simple, but there was quite a lot of work to get to that point. It's deceivingly simple. So I'll walk you through some of those steps, because I know if you're in this space, I've always found this stuff really interesting. So as I said, there had been social impact work done to date. So program logics, data that we really drew upon. It was so rich, such a rich base to start from. But the other really excellent source of data that we looked at and themed was looking at some of the stories that young people we'd supported over the years had shared around what we had helped enable, and that's really speaking to positive change. So there was some gold in those stories. It was a really positive place to start, and good to hear. And then, as I mentioned just a little bit before, collaboration and involving people was sort of a really important part of developing this framework. So what we did was we took 25 team members and young people off-site for the day, and we had a really meaty conversation around what each of us felt ReachOut did for the user groups that we support. And we came up with some starting outcome domains based on our experience of working at ReachOut. There was a lot of listening that day, and we also used that time to develop an early draft of a theory of change, which was kind of a way of interrogating our outcomes thinking here. Then that output was taken, and what you need to do is, well, what we thought would be really useful was to then overlay some of those early outcome domains over our service set to say, okay, do these outcome domains fit with what we do and fit with our different services for different users? And I think what that helped do was determine whether there was actually anything missing from the outcome domains that we had come up with as a group, and using all that other intel. And then we had a very good draft, which we took to a small subset of the ReachOut team and also to young people. So we kind of said, do these sorts of areas of positive change speak to you in terms of what ReachOut has done for you? We had kind of a range of qualitative questions in there. And that quote there is a comment you can see from a young person about that. And then finally, and this was quite a big job, it was my job, bouncing off with Karen as well. But we had the structure, we had the bones of this social impact framework, but then we needed to weave in indicators that could speak to the components of our framework. So we held an internal workshop with key people across the team, product managers, people in services, and others, to say, okay, so what are the indicators that we can bring into our framework? And so that Miro board you can see there is the culmination of a lot of work, but it's just anything that we might want to weave into our framework. And where we landed was really to sort of say, okay, does this bit of data speak to impact? Can it be part of the storytelling around the social impact of ReachOut? So that's kind of where we landed. We ended up with, I think, 115 indicators in our framework. And then we wrote it up into a document which I refer to all the time, but we've got it there for access internally so people can kind of read it, refer to it in their work as well. And that's what we use as the sort of, I guess, the starting line from, the measurement journey then. Yeah. And I'll just pass over to Karen to then talk about how that all then gets weaved into ReachOut.
Sorry, I was just on mute. I won't spend too much time on this because I want to leave enough time for questions and also to talk about what we learned from this. But I think that detail Nat has given us about the work that went into doing this and the really deep dive into things that took place is really important. So we see it as a cycle. It's not really a single activity. It's not about writing a social impact framework and then that's it, that's the end of it. There's a cycle to this that's really important, to seeing this really as an organisational change and an organisational journey rather than actually just a piece of work. So where we're up to is Natalie and the business analysts in our organisation came together weekly to put together an implementation plan where we we started to drill down to how frequently we would have to collect data, at what cadence, who'd have to collect it, where it would be stored, and those kind of who, what, when, how, and why questions. And that led to an implementation plan, which was quite a big piece of work. And we're now at the point of actually we've started collecting our data against that plan. When we have decided to start reporting on that from the end of the calendar year, the financial year, so that we will have data available and reported on and fed back to both the organisation and any externals around September, October. And then comes the piece of work that I think is really critical, which is managing to impact. So that's using the data that you obtain to actually make critical decisions and feedback then into the social impact framework. So that's the kind of cycle, but I won't go into any more on that. So we can move through. Thanks.
So we wanted to leave you with some lessons from the front line. It sounds very dramatic, but in the time that we've been here, there've been some real enablers for this kind of work. So yeah, happy to share and hear of others if people have others to add to this list. I'm sure we'll be adding to this list as we progress as well. But the first observation is that social impact measurements feels like it's often a side hustle in organisations. But it really shouldn't be. And it's been such a pleasure to be given the time and space to be able to focus on this sort of stuff, because I know Karen and I, it takes a lot of thinking time, doesn't it? And I know Karen and I both feel that we have made some real progress in the time that we've been here. So don't make it a side hustle, headline. The second lesson is that, alongside giving people time and space, you need to also make sure that you've got some key infrastructure around those individuals to support it. So in our case, sure, we developed a framework. We were really methodical about it and really pleased with it, but we also needed a data analyst and a business intelligence team to then try and funnel some of that data into dashboards for us, because we don't have access to that and it's kind of everywhere. So really you need to build in the infrastructure to support the people to do the thing. So yeah, that's been fabulous to work with our business intelligence team, and we look forward to continuing to working with them because it's been great. The third lesson is around the importance of democratising social impact measurement, and this is really about not letting your work be a mystery. I think making sure that everyone in your organisation understands not only what outcomes are and the importance of those and the importance of measurement. It's just, it's so helpful. We found it really helpful, and we've spent time talking to the team here about what we're doing and, what certain components of our social value work is, so that there's kind of collective understanding. Your work should not be a mystery, because then if it is, it'll be harder to garner the support in your organisation. So democratise it. Next lesson is, and related to lesson 3, make it relevant for, this probably sounds obvious, but make it relevant for people you work with. And I think part of that is for people to care about it, they need to sort of know what's in it for them. So spend some time kind of thinking about how you can make what you're doing relevant to people across your organisation. And we have tried to do that, and we'll continue to try to do that as well, because we're a pretty diverse bunch here at ReachOut, but it's really important, again, to garner support for your work. Number 5, and I hope I've sold this a little bit earlier in the presentation, but I think it's important to keep, wherever possible, social impact measurement work collaborative. Again, it's related to buy-in, and it may not always be possible or appropriate, but find spots where you can build it in. And I think thinking about collaboration too, think about how you can involve your service delivery team, because they know so much about change. They're witness to it more so than anyone else. So think about how you can involve your service delivery team along the way. It's really important. Number 6 was a very important observation and lesson for us, for both Karen and myself, in that, particularly as a digital organisation, just recognise the value of the data you already have, and perhaps are just not making optimal use of yet. You could be sitting on some real gold. And the beauty of it is that, you know, if you are utilising what you already have access to, you can then just sort of incorporate it into your business as usual kind of measurement process. So you may be able to use it in its current form, but you might just have to do a slight tinkering to it as well. So we at ReachOut have regular intercept surveys that pop up on our website, and so we've sort of tinkered those a little bit so that they now align with our social impact framework and reporting. So think about what you can use in its current form, or perhaps tinker with, so that you don't have to build new things to enable your work. Number 7 is about keeping it simple. And by this, I mean, oh, look, it's relevant across many elements of social impact measurement. But I think for us, this has meant that, you know, you might want to measure everything, especially in a digital organisation. Gosh, there's so much data, but you can't use, and you shouldn't use it all. I think what's been useful for us is just sort of starting off relatively small. So whilst I did say we have around 100, I'm saying around, I don't know the exact figure right now, but I think it's around 115 indicators. Keep in mind that that's across sort of 3 user groups and across those different products. So if you sort of zoom in, it's probably not too many per, well, it's enough, but we haven't gone overboard on a specific service. So try and keep your what you're measuring as simple as you can. So start small, do it well.
Nat, just to quickly interrupt, we're getting some amazing questions coming through. So if we could wrap up the next 3 points and move on to those, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Wonderful, thanks. Karen's touched on number 8. Use the social value international principles for your benefit. When we talked about the importance of not overclaiming at ReachOut, the SVI principles were fabulous because everyone understands the notion of good practice. So it's such a great reference point to use in your organisation, and there's some good stuff there. Number 9, I've sort of touched on this through all of these lessons in some ways, but recognise really early on that social impact measurement and rolling something out in your organisation, it's actually a form of change management. And so with that then comes the importance of needing to communicate with your team regularly, because it shouldn't be a mystery. It should be something, it's like a moving train, and you want to get everyone on board your train, right? So recognise that it is change management. And so that will sort of alter the way you work a little bit. And then finally, and importantly, it is about playing the long game. This stuff is not done quickly, nor, you know, you're not going to get your social impact report in 3 months. The data collection, well, getting things in place takes time. The data collection takes time. So it is a bit of a long game. So you might need to manage expectations, but celebrate the wins we can. So, you know, it might be your response rate is great. It might be we've got some little chunk of data that we might be able to start dipping into. But yes, celebrate those wins when you can and play the long game.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nat and Karen. That was great. And I can't believe how many questions are coming through on the chat. So sorry for that nudge there, but I know you're keen to get to them. I'll hand over to Amy, who will take us through the questions that are coming up.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks, Nat and Karen. That was really great. As Christina says, we've had quite a few questions come through, so we're going to try and get through as many as possible in the remaining time that we have. The first question is from Melissa T, and it's more of a practical question, but it's an important one. So Natalie and Karen, sort of how long did it take you to develop the framework from start to finish? And were there any sort of surprises in terms of time and cost? Any comments around that?
Karen, do you want to go?
Yeah, and I might actually bring in another question that was about how we brought staff on the journey. Yep. And, you know, what kind of teams were involved, because I think they kind of all speak to that piece. So the actual framework took us around 6 or 7 months. That was from start to finish. So we brought Natalie on to do that. And that was a designated role. And I think having a designated role was the main cost, really, but that it wouldn't have happened without that. And then as Natalie went through the collaboration work, the stakeholder interviews, the deep dive into the desk research. We have so many fantastic evaluations and qualitative pieces of work that have been undertaken by the team in the past. So that took a bit of time as well. But from woe to go to get the framework was about 6 months. And the cost was minimal, apart from the significant cost of appointing Natalie to this position to take this forward. So, you know, there's a lot of work being done on internal versus external work in this space. But my view is that an internal person resource to do this is really critical to making it actually stick and not just be something that you've commissioned in and then it gets put in a drawer. And I think, you know, related to that is that really good question about how you bring people on the journey. It's something I think a lot about and have thought a lot about for some years, knowing that at the front line, especially in human services, there's team members, the caseworkers, the frontline people are really, really busy delivering services. So the way that we were able to address that, or we didn't really need to address it, the organisation is really, really committed to social value. And if you can actually construct an argument for your team, for all of the teams that are involved, in the case of frontline workers, you know, their service teams, that this is going to help them understand that what they do each day is making a massive difference for the people they care about. We know that's what gets them out of bed in the morning. Then that is really, really helpful. But the other thing that I think was critical for us is that this was led from the CEO down. So we have had support from the beginning at that leadership level. Because of that, and because I'm on the executive team, I was able to have those negotiations with other parts. For example, our product and digital teams had to pause a lot of stuff to help Nat put together our implementation and indicators. And we just had to fit into other things that were going on in the organisation. But by and large, everybody was incredibly committed to the work. And that was led from the top down. So that was, I think, how we made it happen. And people were given time off, for example, for that workshop. All our frontline workers were given the day off. We had it off-site, we had lunch, we made it nice. And that's when we did the massive brainstorming about the outcomes. So hopefully that answers that little set of questions.
Nat, do you have anything else to add to that before we move on?
No, but yeah, it was just, and I've touched on this, but it was just, I think there's a few questions about the sort of expense. Honestly, it was about being given the space to actually dedicate focus on it. It was just putting someone in the role full time. So I think that was really the kind of like Karen and our CEO were really supportive of that push, and that's why we kind of started saying it's like a concerted, dedicated focus on social impact measurement at ReachOut that's seen us being able to create this framework within about 6 months.
Fantastic. Okay, I suppose there's sort of a set of questions coming through around how you're collecting your data, which is always popular questions to ask in these forums. So I suppose a few questions, sort of what methods and tools are you using to collect your data, sort of proportions, so how many clients are you kind of getting data from, and also sort of in terms of how are you validating these outcomes if you are in any way. So maybe if either of you or both could comment about that.
I can talk about the data collection platforms that we're using. So we use Qualtrics, and we have kind of like regular ongoing intercept surveys on our website for the 3 user groups I talked about. So they're always live, and we can kind of tinker with the settings and do to kind of optimize them. We also have annual surveys that we conduct with user groups as well, so for parents and carers and for young people. We also have, say, a lot of our engagement metrics are actually just collected using Google Analytics or other platforms. So, you know, if it's, say, looking at engagement with email communication, you know, there's a click-through rate there. So there's a platform that manages our EDMs. So, so we'd be using sort of the data collected from that platform to sort of weave in as well. And then we've also got mechanisms built into some of our services. So as I mentioned, the peer chat service where we've got a pre-measure that's an emoji rating scale and a post measure. We're also building, so the user can just rate whether they feel better. We're also building in an additional outcomes mechanism into there using our service design team and our designers to make it engaging for young people. So they're testing how, you know, like what young people think about some of the sort of mock-ups that we've already got. So we kind of have a range of data sources that we use. And also to look at our reach, we look at IP address, which, you know, is pretty accurate in terms of being able to tell if people are in urban, regional, remote areas. So we've got a range of mechanisms that we use. So that from a platform perspective. And then I think often people like to know what you use at a data analysis level. We're using Metabase at the moment, which is, it's doing the job. And we had already heavily invested time in building Metabase dashboards here anyway. So we've kind of building, or that a lot of that data is coming into Metabase now in terms of that dashboard build during implementation.
Great. Karen, do you have anything to add to that?
No, if I can just weave in some of the other questions so we can kind of get through as many as possible. There've been some really good questions about validation. And the kinds of tools you might use and where, you know, just how much you might be able to use qual data. You might be able to do focus groups and interviews. They really speak to the incredible challenge that we had in doing this work. So with a face-to-face clinical or even say a family support service or a child welfare service, you can actually do pre and post testing using validated tools. We can't do that. We don't know who our people are. We don't know. They dip in and out of their own accord, and we have no way of actually capturing pre and post test data. So we have never claimed that we can have clinical outcomes. And that speaks to that whole issue around overclaiming. And it's what's made this really challenging. So yes, it is an accurate thing to say that this is all self-reported data. Yes, self-reported data isn't validated, but you can't do that in this space. It would be lovely, and it's very easy to bring in those kinds of validated tools in a clinical setting, but we aren't operating in that setting. So that's what I think, the reason we wanted to talk about this, I think that makes it really interesting in this social impact space is that we have these unique challenges. So what can we say? What can we actually do? One of the other questions then was about how many people, what's the kind of response rate we get to our surveys. Again, in the digital anonymous space, you can't give someone an exit form. You can't do a 6-month post sending out something to gather the outcomes data. We can do none of that. So we actually have to put a lot of effort into recruiting for our annual surveys through the platform itself. To get our users, and it takes a long time to get that information. It's the best you can do. You actually can't do anything else. We have got some fabulous previous deep dives that were funded by externals that allowed us to capture qual data from young people. And we have qual open field questions in our annual surveys, but that's at the moment the best we can do with the resources we have. And we're really secure that in the context of those limitations, we can still put together a story about our value. That, you know, there's a whole bunch of, in terms of evidence-based practice, there is a whole critique around how much a validated tool is necessarily relevant in the social sector. And I won't go into that, but for us, we know these conversations, we know those debates, and we've done something that I think uniquely allows us to work within those constraints.
Yeah, fantastic. We have a couple more minutes for just maybe a question or two. I suppose there's a couple of questions and there's something I'm interested in about as well is around sort of your plans for reporting and translation, particularly around the 115 indicators that you mentioned, Natalie, when you were doing the presentation. That's a lot of indicators. So the question is sort of around what are your plans on how to report about those? And if I could throw in a question of my own, are all indicators created equal, or are some more important than others? Yeah, and what does that actually look like for you if you're not already doing that already?
We haven't started on social impact reporting yet, so it's almost like a bit early to say. But I think Karen and I, and like having worked quite closely together with Karen for close to a year now, like our style naturally in working with each other is about workshopping what we see coming, like workshopping ideas. And I don't doubt that we'll take that approach when it comes to social impact reporting as well, kind of workshopping what we're really seeing with the data and bouncing off other people in the organisation around, look, this is what it looks like what are your thoughts on this? So kind of formulating a bit of a point of view and then trying to weave it together into a bit of a narrative. We've always thought about this work as being, ultimately being about telling a social impact story for ReachOut. So we've got a bit of an internal, just a kind of snapshot reporting period coming up where we're going to start to look at that and sort of formulate a little bit of an earlier point of view about what it might be showing us, but it's really towards the end of the year that we're going to be in a position to be able to talk about that. And so I don't know if all indicators are created equal. Like I have no doubt that we're going to iterate this model into the future, and I've got a file called Social Impact Framework version 2.0 that I constantly add to in thinking about how this model could evolve. So yeah, I don't know, Karen, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that pretty much covers it, yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we're up to time for questions. I hope we've covered the majority of people's sort of questions coming through the chat. And I suppose if there's any further questions, I'm sure Natalie and Karen won't mind people reaching out. No pun intended. But thank you so much for the questions coming through. They were really great. And I'll throw it back to Christina to start wrapping up the session.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And thank you everyone for those great questions. It really seems to me like we might need a follow-up session with ReachOut once you've got that public report available. Seems like there would be appetite and people are really interested in that. So in this part of the session, wrapping up, I'm supposed to reflect on the session and what did we learn? And I just feel like there's so much in there that we've learned. And I guess what you'll take away might depend on where you're at in your own social impact measurement journey. Couple of things that really spoke to me is the role of the culture of the organisation in providing the foundation for this work. And also there's a really strong message in there about investing money and time in order to successfully implement an impact measurement framework that can be impactful. So that really came out for me. But like I said, there was so much in there. Thank you so much to Nat and Karen and the ReachOut team for speaking with us today. It was a really useful and insightful session, and we really value your time. And thank you also to everyone who joined us in the audience and for your great questions. It was wonderful to see people really engaging with what we were hearing about. And we hope to see you in a future SIMNA event and SIMNA Western Sydney event. Laura will be sending around a survey, a very short one. Please fill it out after the session so we have an idea of what you found useful for the session and what you might like to see in future SIMNA Western Sydney events. And also, if you're not already a SIMNA member, do consider joining. There's a lot of information on the website, simna.com.au. Please check it out. And feel free to reach out to me, Nat, Amy, or Sophie, who's joined us online, if you're interested in joining the SIMNA Western Sydney Organising Committee and helping us continue to foster the practice of social impact measurement in Western Sydney. And you can do that via Laura. She can help connect you to us. So thank you again to our speakers, to Laura for your support in organising today, and to everyone who attended. And we hope to see you again.